Nobody speak.
Oh, yeah, the whole school board.
Everyone says it, the whole world.
The whole school board confided.
This is on though, so let's not.
That's fabulous.
We'll talk about it.
Is the actually the same one as this one?
Should be.
Because California's a safe place, right? I'm not sitting down. I'm gonna do the
I
myself.
understand. I understand.
Mom and Dad, you know?
We sit for a long time, it's stiff. Apologies.
That is. See, oh, there's Benny. Hi, Benny.
Yes, my son.
That's definitely it, man.
Thank you.
I'm just gonna wait a minute and then I'll start.
Say more. I thought it really did. I was curious as to someone being a wise guy.
Maybe she is.
Some kind of Zoom bomb or something. Oh, boy. Ah. Would be a day.
All right, so I'm gonna start because we're supposed to start now.
Fix the camera?
What?
You wanna fix the camera so that looking at you?
Someone starts talking, it should.
It, when I start, it'll,
No, it moved
Eventually.
automatically.
it's that thing, it moves around. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Tuesday, March 2nd budget workshop. Please rise for the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America,
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are you? I said it already, are you?
Okay, so purpose of this month, not even this night, is to begin to talk about the upcoming budget for 21-22. So before I turn the floor over to Mr. Press, I'm just gonna make an announcement about the date of the budget vote. So the date of our budget vote was pushed up a week to allow for observance of the Jewish holiday, which I'm not gonna try to say because I always say it wrong and then Gabi laughs at me. So our budget vote currently be May 11th. And everything on the calendar says May 18th, obviously. So we will send, we will post it on the website. Our budget vote will be May 11th. Most of the dates on the calendar about meetings or budget adoption have also been moved ahead. Our Board of Ed meeting in April is listed as the 20th, but we have to adopt our budget on the 13th, so we're probably gonna move that ahead to the 13th. But again, those announcements will be made as we go on. Next, tonight, we're gonna discuss non-instructional budget items. And Joel's gonna do a little dance for you after. And then, next week, we'll be discussing instructional budget items. So with no further ado, I'm gonna turn the microphone over to, do you have something to say first? I'm sorry, Mr. Reeman has an intro, he didn't advise me. So I'm gonna turn the microphone over to Mr. Reeman.
Today our district was notified, oh, I'm sorry, that's COVID. All reports, sorry. I would like to say though, with regards to COVID, our numbers are still less than 0.5%. We did see a little uptick since we've been back, but that's about right. A week after the break, people don't always follow protocol, but overall, I'm happy to report that we're in pretty good standing. A couple of the districts, I know one district, neighboring district, had 60 positive cases and 300 kids quarantined.
Wow.
And a district not too far from here has closed their high school for the rest of the week because they can't maintain safety protocol. With regards to the budget, good evening and thank you and welcome everybody. Appreciate you being here tonight. The budget process has been an interesting one. We have developed a prudent, no frills budget. Programs that we have wanted to augment or change have been placed on the back burner to ensure our obligations have been met. Let's recall that we went out with a 0% tax levy increase last year. We left approximately $800,000 on the proverbial table. We are still waiting to see if we'll be made whole for this current school year. The governor is banking on $15 billion from the federal government. There is a line in each district's budget called the total change in district support. This is meaningful since it includes both the state and federal funds that will be distributed to schools according to the executive budget. The increase statewide is about 7% of state and federal dollars that are scheduled to be distributed. This means that Nassau and Suffolk counties are receiving an increase of about 1.2% compared to the statewide increase of 7%. In short, Long Island is scheduled to receive 2.1%, nowhere near the traditional share of 12%. We must remember that as soon as the federal stimulus funds stop, the state already has a school aid gap of $1.1 billion to make up. That is the amount in decreased aid when the federal government provided the first round of stimulus. The net impact to schools might have been zero at the time, but we know from the GEA of a decade ago that the state does not immediately take up the slack. In fact, last time it took up to a decade to get back to pre-GEA funding levels. And that's very important, not so much for this year, but moving forward in future budgets. The executive budget proposes to hold foundation aid flat for a second consecutive year at the 1920 levels for every district. This proposal includes no adjustments, updates, or other changes to the statutory formula. School districts remain approximately $4 billion below full funding, and no plan to achieve full funding exists. In late 2020, the state indicated that because districts were not transporting students to and from schools, standby costs such as transportation, staff salary, and benefits would not be aided. The Federal CARES Act also directed any school district and other entity receiving assistance to the greatest extent practicable, continue to pay its employees and contractors during the period of any disruptions or closures related to coronavirus. Couple this with renegotiated transportation contracts, which Joel, Mr. Press will mention again, but I'm going to say it now. Today, again, we received a phone call from We Transport letting us know that we have to renegotiate 3 more new busing contracts, which is going to increase our costs exponentially again. This renegotiated transportation contract, new busing and routes, there's been a tremendous increase in our transportation across the district and community. So you're going to see that tonight. Once again, this is a no-frills budget. There are not bells and whistles in this budget. We're going to meet all of our obligations. I can have to report that all staff remain in place. But we did have some things such as the new science program that was lined up to be purchased next year. That's not going to happen. And Mr. Press will walk us through the non-instructional piece, and we'll get more into the instructional piece next week. We'll leave some tissues from this round. Mr. Press, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Riemann. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, Mr. Press.
Good evening. All right, as Mr. Fleck gets the presentation all set up, I'm happy to be here to present to you tonight the first of our budget presentations. Tonight, we're doing the non-instructional portion. As Mr. Riemann said, the budget we are presenting is no frills, but I do believe that it continues our process of moving the district forward with a focus on increasing students' outcomes, achievement, and the overall environment, the overall learning environment for our students. I do want to thank all the administrators for their hard work in helping put this budget together, and my cohorts in the central office for their cooperation and assistance. As Mr. Riemann said, we face a lot of headwinds. We'll talk about them tonight. A lot of them are in today's presentation. So with that, let's just get started. I just wanted to first present the budget timeline. Today is March 2nd, so this is our non-instructional presentation. Next week will be the instructional revenue and state aid. March 23rd is held open there for budget discussion if needed. And then the subsequent dates, which we have asterisked here based on the fact that our budget vote date is moved up a week. So these dates with the asterisks are 1 week before what you're currently seeing on the calendar. So our total proposed budget for 21-22, $68.9 million. It's a $3.7 million budget to budget increase, which is 5.72% in terms of the percentage increase. Our tax levy increase for 21-22 is currently 2.11%. That is our current tax cap. So this is a tax cap compliant budget that we are presenting. And again, as Mr. Riemann mentioned, we went out last year with a 0%. So over the 2 years, we're averaging just over a 1% in the tax levy increase. A large chunk, so 30% of the increase in this year's budget is attributable to transportation. It's a large percentage. It was a large percentage last year that was also attributed to transportation. We'll get into more of the details. 18% of it is debt service, and 28% is in the area of special education. That's those 3 areas alone account for 76% of the increase in the budget. So just keeping that in mind. Our challenges to budgeting are similar as they were last year and in years past. The 2% tax cap, the fact that foundation aid is not fully funded and now has been frozen, as Mr. Riemann said, for the 3rd year in a row based on the governor's proposal. In addition, because the foundation aid formula has not been fully implemented, we are owed, as a district here in West Hempstead, upwards of $9 million. We would have received $9 million more in state aid had the formula been implemented than we are actually receiving. Again, and the folks at home not see things?
Yeah, they can't see.
Oh,
Oh.
you're missing out. It's riveting.
Second one.
It's just as good as Nichelle's presentation was, Dr. Once again, in his proposed budget, now for the 2nd year in a row, the governor has thought flexibly, bringing in a little habits of mine into my presentation. He's trying to roll a number of expense-based aids into a single category with the goal ultimately of capping the growth in that category, probably in the area of around 2%, which would really be devastating for us because these expense-based aids are based on expenses. The largest increase for us in state aid, the last couple of years has been transportation aid because our expenses are going up. We're looking at budget, based on the executive budget, our increase in transportation aid is about 15%. If that were to be capped at 2%, we'd be in a world of hurt. So we are advocating for things to remain as is, and hopeful that the legislature will listen to the folks here at the school level and do what they did last year and just leave things kind of status quo in terms of keeping the expense-based aids separate. Additionally, there are numerous mandates over which the district has no control. They're listed here. Charter school funding, not as big a deal for us here, but that is money that comes directly out of the budget. We pay about $17,000 per student directly to the charter schools. Health insurance costs are going up. Pension and retirement contributions as well. The TRS has increased from 9.53% to a 9.8% contribution rate for school districts. So that's where it's a 0.3% in the number, the contribution, it represents a 3% budget increase for us here in the district. Some of the larger challenges that we faced that I mentioned, transportation. We budgeted for a fairly large increase in the current year's school budget. We're budgeting for a sizable increase going into next year. Some of that increase budgeted for next year is based on increases in transportation costs this year. And we'll get into this a little more, but as you know, Veterans was taken over by We Transport in the summer of 2019. We Transport held our rates flat, and they honored our contract for that year, but they told us they would not honor that for 2021. So we had to go out and rebid those routes. What came back, Veterans was a low-cost provider. What came back in the quotes were more market rates. So we our budget increased. In addition, as you know, RivLab, one of our other low-cost carriers, went out of business last year in October. That resulted in an expense increase of about $300,000 last year. And that increase carried forward into the current school year. And then to add insult to injury, Acme Bauman, which is probably the last of the low-cost carriers, declared bankruptcy in April of last year. So we ended up having to rebid those routes as well. So we've been hit pretty hard on the transportation front. I don't think there are really many low-cost carriers left out there. So I'm hoping that our increases kind of level off at some point, but that remains to be seen. As Mr. Reeman said, we got a letter from Mood Transport today. They are not renewing a number of our contracts going into next year, so we will have to rebid those as well. And COVID this year did not help at all. We had to cap capacity on some of our buses. We had to add buses as a result. And so our costs really went up there as well. Adding a bus, as we'll see, it's one bus, but we're paying $7,000 a month per bus. It's $70,000 right off the bat. Special education needs we will talk about next week, and I'll get into more detail about debt service as well. That's the other area where we've seen some increase. Debt service, though, the increase there has been offset by building aid that we received. Again, that's another one of those expense-based aids in a sense that when we spend money, we get aid support from the state. So I had that bus coming in a little faster. Mr. Reeman said it was too fast and it's dangerous. So I slowed it down a little bit in the animation. I wanted to give you some perspective because we're throwing out large numbers in terms of transportation, and I wanted to give some perspective to back that up. So we transport, not the bus company, but the district is responsible for transporting over 1,100 students to 94 different schools out of district. To put that in some perspective, the enrollment in the public schools is about 1,700 students. So this is significant. We are proud of the fact we are kind of like the district, small but mighty in our transportation office, that we have a fairly lean staff and we are able to monitor and manage routes. That it's about 120 actual routes to cover 94 schools, because each school will have, in some cases, 3, maybe 4 different routes, 5 in some cases. The two main ways that we contract for buses, it's either per vehicle, where we pay for the whole vehicle, or we pay per seat, per student per month. This is all per month. And the per student rates, we either pay, depending on the contract, a set amount for each student. The example here, $712 per student. For 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is $712 for each student. The other way we pay is if the contract may have a higher rate for the first student and then a lower rate for each additional student. So in this example here, these are actual rates, we may pay $5,000 for the first student and $1,800 for each additional student on that bus.
I want to see that first student.
Yeah, I can see some of the numbers for this. In some cases, we do only have that first student.
Per month.
Per month.
Per month.
So $5,000 per month, that's $50,000 per year. So this is all Bauman related information here. These are actual amounts from actual schools that we transport students to, and you can see here, these are comparisons from 1920 to 2021. So school number 1, we were paying $3,700 per vehicle. That rate is now double this year, and we had to add a vehicle. So the cost alone right there, the increase is $191,000 for the year. School number 2, again, the per vehicle rate increased about $2,200. We had to add another vehicle. It's $155,000 a year right there. This all adds up. The cost of rebidding our Bauman routes was about $500,000 of an increase this year, just for these routes. There's a few more here that I did not include. And you can see as we go down, school number 5, the rate there almost nearly tripled per student. So small increase there, school number 5, but this all adds up. This next slide is various different schools and various different providers. But here you can see school number one, we went from paying $814 a student to $5,700 for the first student, $300 each additional, at an added cost of $43,000. School number two, again, increase of almost $100,000. There was an increase in the number of students. That half is not half a student, it's one student just in, I think this was an afternoon route. And then the impact of a single student coming in and going to a school where we had no student before. School number three, we have one student going there. From a budgeting standpoint, fortunately, only for 4 months, but we were paying $7,000 a month for that one. So these are market rates. We go out to bid, we get bid results, and this is what we get. So it's been a challenge for us this year. Any questions about any of that so far? Okay. Additional things to consider as we go through CPIU, which is our rate of inflation. For 2020, it's 1.23%. It's a fairly low number. It's one of the lower numbers in the last several years. Last year, of course, it was 1.81. It has come down to 1.2. That's a factor in our tax calculation. State aid payments, right now, the governor's executive budget has us increase aid of about $780,000. That is largely, well, it's all of it is expense-based aids because the foundation aid is flat. This is all based on building aid and transportation aid, again, due to our increased expenses. We're hopeful that in this game that gets played in Albany, the legislators usually get involved and there's some additional funds that come to us, but this is a whole different world that we're in today. So I remain hopeful, but cautiously optimistic. Employer retirement contributions, ERS is essentially flat, a little bit of a decrease there. TRS, slight increase. We're projecting an increase of about $100,000 over the current year. Our 2% tax levy cap, which is not really a cap and it's not 2%, but 2% is part of the, is one of the factors in the formula this year, because generally the factor is the lower of 2% or the rate of inflation. As I said, the rate of inflation 1.23%, so that's the number that gets used with these other factors in our formula. The other factor here that varies from year to year is a tax-based growth factor, which for us, we're among the lowest in the county, and that tax-based growth factor actually has to do with the addition of new taxable properties in the district. Capital projects also has an impact as well. When you spend money on capital projects, the formula allows you to increase the levy to cover the expenses related to the capital expenses. And additionally, similarly for BOCES, this is something that started last year. We include the BOCES capital projects expense in our calculation. Here's our formula in action for those who want to see the numbers. The bottom line is our allowable levy for 21-22 is $47.8 million. That is the equivalent of the 2.11% tax levy increase. And again, that is within our individual district's tax cap. Any questions on any of this so far? Okay. Our bond projects continue. To date, we have borrowed about $29 million of the voter authorized $35.6 million using a combination of serial bonds, which is the long-term debt, and the bond anticipation notes, which are the short-term debt. We will need to borrow additional funds to complete Project C. The plan is to use the bond anticipation notes for that. We got some good news today. We got approval from the state on the variance for middle school gym, which moved the process along for getting SED approval on Project C. So we are hopeful to get that started this summer. We have bids are out. We can't award them until the project is approved up at SED, but we could put the bids out. And the bids for Project C came back very good and actually under the budget that the architect had anticipated for Project C. So we're going to go out to borrow based on my conversations with our fiscal advisor. This is a very good environment for borrowing for municipalities. Interest rates are very low. They're actually ridiculously low based on the information I received from our financial advisor, and they're seeing rates they haven't seen in a very, very, very long time. So that is favorable to us, which is one of the reasons why we're moving forward with the borrowing that I have projected, which is to go out for some long-term debt, serial bonds to retire the short-term debt and move this thing along. So as a result, with our bond borrowing, we're looking at an increase in the expenditure side for debt service of about $700,000, but that is offset in part by building aid, increased building aid. So our expenses are going up, but our revenue is also going up to help offset that. Any questions about that? Okay. So
There's some questions in the chat box. I'm not sure if you're referring to that or not. Sorry to chop you off.
Just stay at the end of the meeting, we'll ask, we'll do the question.
Okay, he was asking, so I wasn't sure. All right, thank you for clarifying.
So in terms of facilities work, we have a small budget in our transfer to capital line, $85,000. That's to cover some work on our fire alarm system at the high school, and then to upgrade some work on our building management system, so that all of our new boilers and our old boilers and other equipment we can speak to them remotely from an app or from a centralized location, and we can see what's going on at all times. Our bond projects that we have that are set to start this summer is the conversion of the first floor Chestnut Street into the pre-K center. We're converting our high school library into a 21st century media center, upgrading the family and consumer science room at the high school, the music suite at the high school, district-wide parking lot paving and wiring, and there's some door work going on at some of the elementary schools as well. Additionally, there's some other district-wide projects planned that are not part of the bond. These are projects that were budgeted for in previous years, including upgrades to the kitchens at Cornwell and George Washington, and the high school auditorium work to replace the ceiling in the high school auditorium, and as well to convert what was the projection room into a true light and sound booth. Additionally, as part of our Smart Schools Bond Act, we've got new cameras planned district-wide and new door locks as well. So this is our overall consolidated budget grouped together by our function codes. We'll get into the detail today and next week. These are our non-instructional categories. And so we're going to work through some of the line items here, aggregated. These are our 1,000 codes, 1,000, 1,200, and the 1,300 codes. Not really much going on here. These are pretty much flat. We have an increase. We do have an increase in district meeting. In conversation with Ms. Bryant, we wanted to budget for the possibility of some additional expenses related to the budget vote. Additionally, we have brought in a new outside vendor to help us operate our budget vote so that we can do that more effectively and more efficiently. The next slide here, again, mostly flat. We've got a decrease in the treasurer line 1325. That's actually to bring things more in line with actual expenses in this code as opposed to what we had budgeted. We anticipated higher expenses. This year, we've hired a fabulous new district treasurer, one of the best hires I've ever made in my entire career. So he's been working out great. Additionally, we moved an expense out of here. There's a special ed consultant that we hired that was moved out of this code into a 1310 code because we're now paying for that through BOCES. On to the next slide. Again, mostly flat here. We've got an increase in data processing. a little bit. This number here for the board members is slightly different. There was a typo in the 1681 line there. So we have an increase in that code. It's largely for additional software. It's for increases in software. There's additional costs related to testing services through BOCES and our app developers in there as well. Otherwise, we are generally flat. Our district-wide insurance, the slight increase there that is due to a projected 7% increase that we're told of from NYSER, which is our insurance provider. These are mostly our transportation codes. We talked about the increases going on here. Again, I just want to be clear, the increases, we talked about them in more detail. We talked about more of the out-of-district transportation, but there are increases in our in-district transportation as well, tied into this new contract that we have with We Transport. Additionally, that contract also covered our athletics costs. So our athletics transportation costs are going up. Again, we had a good deal going on with veterans. They would sometimes take our kids to games that were close by, maybe to Malvern. They wouldn't even charge us. We don't have that anymore. We're even starting to get charged for bus drills, which we never got charged for before.
Literally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah.
The youth program line is new. It's in there because we had expenses related to the scope program that we were required to provide to essential workers during the pandemic. So we added that in there. But the expense is relatively insignificant. In our benefits line here, again, TRS we talked about. There's that slight increase there. Workers' comp actually went down. We actually just received, well, you'll be getting it in the regular business meeting coming up. We were the recipient of a reward from our workers' comp company because we have such a great record of safety. So they were sending us $8,000. Yeah.
0 days.
So,
Yeah.
all right. I'm sorry for that. Bill will take care of it. And then our medical costs here as well, the 9060 code is an increase. We are budgeting for a 6% increase in that area. These codes, this is our debt service. So we have an increase. The net increase is about 700,000. You see an increase in the serial bond line that is offset by a decrease of $250,000 in our short-term debt service, that's where our bands come from. So because the plan is to retire the bands, we won't have that much of an expense, retire the existing band. Otherwise, we are largely flat here. The bottom of the line there, 9950 transfer to capital. We zeroed that out last year. We had funds budgeted. We zeroed it out when we decided to go up with a 0% tax levy increase. So we're increasing that slightly to take care of some of those projects that I mentioned. Any questions about any of the numbers here?
Yeah, one quick question, and I think you addressed it mostly last year when we brought in last year's budget, but I know there were more costs, but is there any realized savings that we can just visually see out of the things that didn't happen last year due to the shutdown from the state?
I think it's hard in those areas because mostly what we didn't pay for was transportation and some athletics stipends.
Right.
So we kept the budget line flat because when we had budgeted for last year, 1920, we didn't, we were not aware that the pandemic would come. So we kept those codes basically flat for coming year for 21-22, anticipating that we would return to some sense of normalcy. So we won't necessarily see the savings if there are expenses that are underexpended at the end of a year. Those funds go into the fund balance, to the extent they are underexpended based on if your revenue comes in over expenditures, the funds go into fund balance. But we weren't really able to, there wasn't anything that happened last year that allowed us to reduce the budgets for this year. In fact, their expenses went up. Transportation went up, got a lot more in terms of coverages and substitutes. Because when people are out for quarantine, we had a number of people have had to quarantine in terms of staff. So we haven't really, no savings really that carried forward.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other? Next steps, really just keep in mind, as I said, these numbers are based on the governor's executive budget. They're in negotiations up there in Albany, so what comes out at the end of that, we won't know until, they're supposed to adopt their budget by April 1st, so we'll keep an eye on that. Any changes that come up or any updates, we will let you all know. And then just a reminder, we're back here next week to talk about instructional budget and revenue. And then again, our budget vote set for Tuesday, May 11th, in the middle of June.
Just a question at the beginning of the year, when the governor had put in place that regulation, part of the CARES Act, where like if a teacher's child had a quarantine and they could stay home, did we see a huge increase in coverage and payout for that? Like, I know they didn't get paid the same amount of money, but did we see a large expenditure for that?
We actually didn't see a lot of that. We had a few, but not a lot. And as you're saying, people, the cap there on daily pay was $200.
So it offset.
People did not want to get paid at, their regular pay is higher than that. But we didn't have a lot of people who were home because for their child's school was closed or the daycare was closed, or if they were ill.
Does the board have any other questions for Joel before we open the chat box? Read those questions. We can come back to him. Let's look at the chat box so I can get some of those questions answered.
Share. You gotta hit
Oh, there they go. Okay, oh, jeez. Okay, Mrs. Hackney, you did get to see it after that question, right? So I could skip that? I'm gonna say yes. How many students in West Hempstead attend charter schools? Off the top of your head?
It's somewhere around 11 or 12.
It's right around,
Small
it's right
number.
around 10. Maybe 11, maybe 9,
Yeah.
somewhere in there.
I'm trying to read this, I'm sorry. Is the BOCES capital project spread across different districts or just a specific tax for our district?
That one is, it's shared among all of the component NASA BOCES districts.
I feel like, I don't know if anybody can hear me because Barbara didn't answer me before. Mrs. Day, just nod if you heard that answer. Okay, I just want to make sure. What's the total allotted for what? For the BOCES capital project, or was that question in regard to something else? I'm sorry.
No, it was for the BOCES capital project within our district.
Okay, Joel.
Yeah, so the net expense, because they credit us with the aid, it's somewhere in the range of, I think, $37,000.
And I love trying to answer this next question. However, if it was up to me, it would have been 4 years ago, probably more. The pre-K center got held up because of COVID, so SED essentially shut down, didn't approve any of our projects to have construction last year over the summer, which was when this was supposed to start. So as long as we get the approval that we're hoping we're going to get in the next week or so, I shouldn't jinx that either. We're hoping to have this construction done over the summer. I don't want to put out there that we're going to be ready to open in September. Maybe we can try to do a soft opening come January, but it definitely, I just don't want to say September because we're not sure that we'll be done constructing by then. But the sooner the better, as far as I'm concerned. Is May 11th the budget date for the entire state? No, May 11th is only the budget date for certain districts. I believe there's 5 districts that I'm aware of that have changed their vote. How do we see this year's budget affecting the 2022 budget? Well, I'm gonna give that one to you, because I know my answer, it's just gonna be bad.
Well, we are keeping a very close eye on the developments. Obviously, a lot of the aid that is projected to all school districts in the 21-22 year is based on federal funding. And so if that federal funding goes away in the 22-23 school year, it's gonna have a significant impact on a lot of districts. Our deduction, which is back, our deduction in state aid, which is backfilled with federal aid, is significant for us. But there are other districts, I'm sure, that receive larger amounts of state aid. If they did not receive that aid going forward, we'd have a much bigger problem statewide. So we are keeping a close eye on it. It's too early at this point. We just don't know. There's too many unknowns for us to know what all of the impact of what's going on at the federal level and with the budget at the state level, how that's going to affect us in the 22-23 school year, which is just starts about 18 months from now.
But we do know that the fact the state took the expense aid away from us, from all of us, that hurts us a lot.
Yeah.
Especially with transportation.
Yeah.
It was a huge impact to them.
Absolutely.
That was a big conversation. Last Thursday was I sit on the Nassau Suffolk School Board Association as well. So we had a meeting last Thursday, and that was one of the big legislative agendas that we have, is to rally around the fact that we're losing all this aid and we're not getting back all of our state funding that we essentially lost due to COVID, and doesn't look like we're going to be being made whole anytime soon. And that moving forward is causing a problem for us, because it's hard to see what's going to happen the following year when you can't even be made whole for last year, let alone this year. So there was a lot of talk about our legislative agenda moving forward for all of Long Island, and pushing to try to recoup some of that money and some of that aid, including the transportation aid, moving forward. Just playing games with the budget and moving around aid that we had in the past. 100%, Mrs. Hafner, he is 100% playing a lot of games these days.
A lot of different games.
That's not the but yes, it's problematic, because we don't know what's going to happen on the state side. We don't know what kind of federal money is going to end up in the state, so the state can move it forward to us. So until we see any kind of push that way, I don't know if I'm allowed to say what I want to say to that, so I'm just going to go like this. We're just going to have to wait and see now on both accounts. We have a lot of new players in the game. Do we have any other questions in regards to this, or from the board in regards to this? I do know that administration, Mr. Press, the district leadership has worked very hard
Knew what just came up.
well, I'll go back to that in 1 second, but anyway, let me finish my thought, and then I'll answer that question. I do know that they put a lot of time and effort into making a very strict budget that works within our confines and keeps us to within the tax cap, but is able to keep us whole. And I know that we're not necessarily able to bring in some of the programs that we really wanted to for next year. But to me, maintaining the programs that we do have and maintaining the staff that we do have, and not shortchanging the students of West Hempstead is definitely a huge thing for us. And that makes us all very happy. So, Mrs. Day, what's the anticipated date for the retrieval of which info? The state aid numbers from like the state, and it is never, his budget is already out. His budget runs, correct?
Yes.
So really it comes about when the legislators push to throw more money at districts and stuff like that. We're not, I'm just answering for myself, you can correct me if I'm wrong. There's never an anticipated time to see if he's gonna give you extra money or make us whole. So I don't know if you have a different way to look at.
No, I mean, I think in terms of the actual state aid in the budget, we will know. Anticipation is that they will finish it up by April 1st. Sometimes they go a little long, but that's our anticipated date for that. The other things that Mrs. Brome mentioned about being made whole for 1920 transportation expense and other things like that, we're still waiting. Yeah.
And we will keep waiting. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Oh, yeah, Ben,
Yeah, I just want to applaud our administration for doing such a wonderful job in putting this whole thing together, because through this difficult time, I'm sure, putting the numbers and doing the right thing for the kids was at the top of their list. So my applause to them.
Thank you.
I want to know how to do that, Susan. I'm calling you tomorrow.
If you're sitting here, you can just do this.
I wanted to do it on the picture.
It's in the reactions button.
Okay, I'm gonna look for that. All right, so if we have no further questions from the audience, oh, look, she's just showing off. If we have no further questions from the audience, I'm gonna go for a motion to move into executive session for advice of counsel and to discuss personnel.
So moved.
All in favor? Aye. I want to thank everybody who took the time to show off just now and show up for this meeting tonight. And we anticipate seeing you all next week at Friends and Friends, 7:30, back on the Zoom channel. Have a good night. Vinny, I'm gonna call you on the phone. I don't know where he went, but Vinny, I'm gonna call you on the phone. Okay. So, Tracy, there.
No, I think it's funny.